Hey everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and today I'm bringing you a video about Pluto going retrograde. And this happened today, which is Saturday, April 25th at 12:55 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And you can see Pluto is highlighted here in the sign of Capricorn at 25 degrees 0 minutes. Pluto goes retrograde for about roughly 6 months every year. So this isn't necessarily an unusual happening. And it also retrogrades in the same sign for many years because Pluto moves so slowly through a sign. It's often in the same sign every time Pluto goes retrograde each year. Pluto's been in the sign of Capricorn since 2008, and it'll be there until the beginning of 2024. So you can see that it takes quite a bit of time for Pluto to pass through a sign. So in general, because of that, Pluto relates to collective energy, collective perspective, mass consciousness. It can relate to things happening to the masses all at once because it just has that evolutionary force about it. But we all have Pluto in our own charts, and this Pluto retrograde will be occurring in our own chart, so we can see then how it too will relate to us personally in that way. So I wanted to talk about what Pluto means a little bit more, what it means in the sign of Capricorn, and then also talk about what the retrograde time means. And I'm going to be using some information from this book called Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul by Jeff Green. And basically, from Jeff's perspective, Pluto has to do with the evolution of the soul. It has to do with the soul evolution in this lifetime based on experiences in previous lifetimes and what potentially we are capable of, in essence, kind of evolving through in this lifetime in relation to our own Plutonian energies in our charts. It has to do with soul growth. It has to do with, like I've said, evolution. It's really about evolving. And the thing about Pluto is, because it is considered the ruler of the underworld, that this evolution often happens through intense encounters or intense experiences that are very revelatory or revealing. And they push us to evolve. And that process of evolution isn't always something that we naturally want to go with, because it means letting go of the past and moving towards the future, which is unknown. So sometimes, because of that resistance, when we're dealing with Pluto, what happens then is that certain circumstances end up being created because of that resistance that end up causing us to have to evolve ultimately. And because Pluto does deal a lot with the unconscious, it can be challenging for us to identify what needs to be transformed. And I want to read a little bit from this book by Jeff Green about Pluto. So this is what he has to say about Pluto. He says that he stated that 75 to 80% of our behavior is conditioned by unconscious forces that are tied up to past patterns in identity association, and that these past patterns were linked to the cumulative evolutionary forces that are rooted in our desires. These past patterns were linked to our unconscious emotional security needs because of the familiarity that they represent. We automatically gravitate to those old patterns because they are what we already are. There is a reliance upon them. The reliance and natural gravitation to these old patterns creates blocks to further growth and evolution. We stagnate as a result. The evolutionary force of the soul induces pressure to eliminate and transform these old patterns into new patterns. The old patterns represent security. the new patterns insecurity. This transitional process between the old and the new explains many of the apparently negative behavioral characteristics associated with Pluto. And I'll add here the word shadow can be associated with Pluto because the shadow tends to be what is in our unconscious that we're unaware of, or what we've pushed to our unconscious, that ultimately kind of can subconsciously control us in various ways. So he goes on to say, the transitional process between the past and the future, security versus insecurity, can create a variety of behavioral problems. Because the present or future, necessary changes, evolution, can be viewed as threatening to our existing security and reality, which would be the past, we resist the future-oriented evolutionary force operating in life. This resistance can create potential dams that thwart or block the natural evolutionary flow that promotes the state of continual evolution. These dams of resistance create the phenomena of a cataclysmic evolutionary event that has the effect of moving the dam so that the natural flow can continue. From a psychological point of view, these dams of resistance can create complexes, compulsions, and obsessions. It can lead to fear, anger, or in extreme cases, rage if the individual experiences emotional shock or forced removal of something, i.e. a relationship, from his or her life. The individual might be angry and potentially violent because of the feeling that life was out of control. The individual may feel that forces larger than himself or herself were in operation. Rarely would the individual understand that the responsibility of this experience originated from within due to the evolutionary and karmic necessity. As a result, the individual could turn vindictive, mean, or cruel and attempt to, quote, get back at whatever the emotional pain is. The individual could experience a personal hell and create a hell for others as he or she submerges into the deepest recesses of the unconscious, emotional, and security needs that are rooted in the past. The famous underworld of Pluto. The person who resists the evolutionary pressure or intent to change old patterns might have no perspective or knowledge of why a crisis was occurring, why the partner was leaving. This lack of perspective or knowledge creates the behavior reactions described here. In other words, the individual would be typically unaware of his or her own personal dam that had finally created or led to a prevention of further growth. Down the road, after the immediacy of the event was over, not only would there be an evolutionary leap, but also perspective. The individual would regenerate and be, quote, reborn with a new level of consciousness or awareness. The entire approach to relationships could be radically altered or changed. By plunging into the hell and experiencing a kind of death, the person evolved into his or her own heaven for a time once the perspective gained in hindsight occurred. Pluto symbolizes death and rebirth, metamorphosis, transformation, and regeneration. These processes manifest because of limitations or stagnations that are rooted in our old emotional and security patterns based upon our evolutionary past that condition our present orientations to this life. When these unconscious forces create the dam effect, then the above evolutionary and karmic consequences must occur so the individual's evolutionary journey can continue. Okay, so it's an interesting book if you're interested. There's a lot of information here, but he's describing how Pluto can potentially work if we're not kind of taking the cues to transform. And sometimes that just may not be possible, and we do end up in those situations where we are forced. And I wanted to also read, because we're dealing with Pluto retrograde right now, what he describes as having Pluto retrograde in your chart, because I think it can translate into what the opportunity for Pluto retrograde for the next 5 months or so gives everybody. And he writes, it may be understood that the retrograde Pluto tends to place the emphasis on the desire to return to the source of the soul, or to evolve in a more accelerated fashion. Because of the individualizing effect of Pluto retrograde, the person must do that which they must do in their own way. At the deepest possible level, Pluto retrograde promotes an internalization process and a relative need to withdraw from external activity. Because Pluto correlates to the deepest reaches of our unconscious, this impulse may not be actively implemented given other factors in an individual's total makeup. The need to withdraw may simply be sensed as a wistful desire that remains unfulfilled. Even if it's not acted upon, the individual will still feel a sense of distance from him or herself and others in a fundamental way. Because the retrograde tends to emphasize the desire to return to source, or the need to accelerate the elimination of separating type desires, the sense of cyclic or perpetual dissatisfaction is deeper in these individuals than in those who do not have Pluto retrograde. So basically what he's saying here is that people who have Pluto retrograde in their natal chart, and I'm suggesting that this also translates into what the experience of Pluto retrograde for collectively is about by transit, is that it is a time where more self-reflection is available or might be needed in order for us to look at this Plutonian aspect of ourselves. And also the part about wanting to connect with source, that Pluto retrograde is the energy of wanting to reconnect with source. And so I see this Pluto retrograde time as the opportunity then to move more towards the source connection aspects or expression of Pluto retrograde, or of Pluto, rather than acting out, or rather than pushing, I guess, more of the energy, keeping it more unconscious. This is the desire more to connect with source, which I also translate as like our basically divine expression, or our highest expression. So I see it as an opportunity, Pluto retrograde, to really look deeply at ourselves, and we have time to do it because it's in this process for 5 months, and really begin to look at our shadow, look at where we may be dealing with control issues, or where we may be dealing with any kind of Plutonian energy that's controlling us. And I did want to also mention how he describes the aspects of Pluto regarding that control. He says that another potential negative Pluto psychological state is guilt or sin. Guilt or sin can imply a standard of conduct that is, quote, right, and that we can do this by aligning ourselves with a religious or spiritual standard. But then that creates a structure of internal and external confrontation, which is also a Pluto process. This confrontation makes us aware of our limitations, which are based on what we are not as compared to what we could or should be. And he goes on to say that this confrontation with our limitations can make us feel guilty, and in some cases angry, as we do not meet our standards or the standard of the system we have aligned ourselves with. Other sources of the standard of right conduct can produce the same effects, which may be our own selves, our parents, our teachers, our friends, society, lovers, and so forth. It is the relationship between ourselves and what other source we have formed a relationship with that can create the sense of guilt when we do not meet the expectations implied in the standard of right conduct. So he says another cause or source of guilt is linked to the potential Plutonian phenomena of manipulation. As has been explained, one of the ways that Pluto instigates evolution is through a relationship to something higher or more evolved than ourselves, or through a relationship to something or someone who represents what we need. we can manipulate situations or people in order to get what we need, or we can be manipulated by situations or people so they can get what they need. Manipulation can then create a situation of using or being used in order to have needs satisfied, Pluto. The intrinsic problem is to maintain the relationship only for the duration of the need, and then to eliminate that relationship because of a new need that dictates a relationship to something or someone else. The sense of guilt is directly linked to knowing that we are using a situation or a person for our own reasons or needs. And he goes on to say that it's important to understand that relationships formed in this way are a natural reflection of the desire to grow and evolve, to join or unite ourselves and our resources with another's resources and state of being. That's Plutonian. Personal limits are transmuted or metamorphosed because of the relationship form. Since this is a reflection of the natural evolutionary desire to evolve and grow, the effect of use and manipulation leading to guilt is also natural. This natural effect occurs in order for us to become progressively more aware of our intentions and motivations, which are Pluto, and to learn from prior experiences in such relationships. Okay, and then he uses one more example of the Plutonian expression as being attracted to taboos, and how we could be attracted to powerful experiences or associations through which the individual may discover a dimension or aspect of himself or herself, which would be the taboo. In addition, that which symbolizes a taboo can be very attractive because the potential to transform existing behavioral limitations can occur through experiencing it. Taboos consequently have tremendous power for some individuals. That which constitutes a taboo can be anything: beliefs, values, norms, customs, etc. Through experiencing the taboo, a growth process will occur, even if the experience defined by the taboo is negative in nature. And he gives an example of somebody who's on a spiritual path but has an addiction to pornography, and how that, that addiction is key in actually helping that person, liberate from that taboo or that energy and move more towards source. So a lot of information about Pluto there, but you can kind of get the idea. I mean, it's a very deep subject. It's very sensitive, and but the flip side of Pluto is that when that energy is freed up from some of those more shadowy ways that the energy has been directed, then it's liberated for us to then apply to various aspects of life. And that can just be an intensity and a power that we can really use to focus on creating. But because Pluto also, because it rules, mass consciousness, that energy then can be used for social welfare. It can be used for universal welfare. So you might find, people who are highly Plutonian in their chart being able to work to help other people kind of come up or come out from more identification to the more shadow elements of life, so perhaps working with people who are struggling with addiction, or any aspect of kind of the those Plutonian darker elements that somebody may have struggled with themselves. All right, so Pluto in Capricorn. And I want to emphasize too that we've got to take this whole chart into consideration, because there's interesting things happening in the chart at this time that are giving more understanding of what this Pluto retrograde is really going to be about. So Capricorn has to do with, which is the sign Pluto's in, with like structures, government. It has to do with hierarchy, climbing the corporate ladder, climbing the material ladder. These are all kind of Capricornian themes of like effort and work and producing. But other aspects of Capricorn are like personal authority and having a couple more keywords I want to share. having self-discipline, organization, caution, ambition, seriousness, and goal orientation. So these are, positive ways that the Capricornian energy can be expressed. A few more are dominance, austerity, restrictiveness, inhibition, and control. So you can see how if the shadow Pluto energy is operating through the sign of Capricorn, it might be like just this excessive materialism. It might be, I want to say stinginess, but I'm trying to think more broadly because this is like mass consciousness. It's really kind of what we're seeing, like this height of patriarchy that's really kind of crumbling because, see, Pluto's been in the sign of Capricorn since 2008, and you're just starting to see like, various aspects of the government and, various aspects of corporate greed, that are all kind of starting, the underbelly, the Plutonian side of them are all starting to be revealed. And so this is collectively what we're all dealing with Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. Pluto deals with authority. I'm sorry, Capricorn deals with authority and, again, government. And so I would imagine by the end of Pluto's tour through Capricorn, we are going to see quite a bit of change by 2024. And the other thing is there was a conjunction between Pluto and Saturn, the sign that rules Capricorn, at the beginning of this year, 2020, in January. So that really set off a kind of a, I want to say like a no going back kind of energy, because if Saturn is the structure and Pluto is the death and transformation of that structure, in Capricorn, the sign that rules patriarchy and government and authority and control, there's obviously big changes occurring and going to continue to occur. So what does this mean for us personally, Pluto retrograde in Capricorn? I feel that we also have to look at the whole chart here in order to fully understand that. But I feel that it's going to bring up our own relationship to authority, to control, to power, to materialism, like where are we with that in our lives? And have we sort of been kind of involved with maybe a more unconscious way of expressing that in our lives? This could manifest as perhaps seeing our relationship to the material world in a different way. And speaking of that, going back to the collective understanding of this is one of the symbols that's bringing us awareness about the environment, because Capricorn is an earth energy. And so it's, and all of the changes that are happening to our earth. And so this is, very poignant time, or a very, this is very much in our collective awareness right now. But on a personal level, yeah, how are we relating to power and authority, and the way that we've related to power or used power in our life in relationship to the authority that we have or that we align ourselves with. This could involve, changes around parental relationships. This could be just changes to our, putting so much authority in certain people in our lives, whether it is parents, whether it is government. These are various aspects that the Pluto in Capricorn can be playing out in our own personal lives. I mean, and again, especially you need to fit it into your own chart to fully understand. But to give you an idea of how it does relate to all of us a little bit more personally is to look at the actual aspects of other planets in the chart. And one of the aspects is that Mercury here in Aries just squared Pluto. And so Mercury is our thinking, and Mercury is communicating and exchange of information. And Aries is about, like, it's impulsive and it's bold and it's courageous, but it's squaring Pluto in Capricorn. So there's some tension there that needs resolving. And one of the ways I see this is, it's kind of like we may be beginning to see how either our own thoughts and ideas or those of others are kind of influencing the way that we think, but not necessarily in the best way. You know, it might be through fear, it might be through manipulation. Remember, that was a explanation of Pluto in Jeff Green's book, that you know, there's manipulation in order to try and control and maintain, you know, authority in the world, essentially. So this could be symbolizing, you know, how have we been investing our own minds into sort of the perpetuation of certain structures, basically, that are perceived as authority, but they're not necessarily, or these structures are trying to control and manipulate. And so this Mercury in Aries wants to break away. You know, Mercury in Aries wants to think for itself and to you know, have its own perspective, have its own opinion, and not really care so much about tradition, which is something that Capricorn is connected to. And the Mercury in Aries wants to really, like, again, courageous, bold, I would also say, like, inventive in a way, you know, like new ideas. So that's one piece of this, you know, and it could also be us recognizing this aspect in our own life and how maybe we've been caught up in some kind of manipulation in the way that we communicate, you know, wanting to get our way, wanting to get what we want, Pluto in Capricorn, that, you know, is not necessarily, it's not necessarily, it's just coming from a very unconscious place. You know, it's coming from the shadow, it's coming from the depth of the unconscious. And so this might be an opportunity during this Pluto retrograde time, with the symbol of Mercury in Aries here in the chart, that, you know, we're going to be able to kind of have new awareness about this, have new understanding about this, and be bold to be able to take steps towards talking about that, communicating about that, you know, in order to kind of free us from the you know, from the games or the power play, you know, that this dynamic could have been creating for us and for others in our life. The other thing that's interesting to point out at this time is that Jupiter is right here in Capricorn as well, near Pluto. They've already conjuncted, but they're still close together. And so that Jupiter is part of this Pluto retrograde chart. And Jupiter deals with abundance and growth of perspective and optimism and joy, really. And this conjunction here between the two is symbolic of some kind of new perspective or transformation of our perspective, again, around these Capricornian themes of patriarchy, government, control, you know, parental influence, authority, anything that, you know, we see as like what creates the structure of society. And Jupiter ultimately wants to expand, but Pluto wants to transform. So this is another kind of piece to this puzzle, in the sense that there is something here that's suggesting a transformation of perspective that has to happen. Now, Jupiter and Pluto can also be, again, that if Pluto's expressed in that very powerful way, this can be like a lot of growth. This can be a lot of expansion, especially in relationship to the structures in our own lives. But it really just depends on how that Plutonian energy is operating in our lives. And I think this Pluto in retrograde time is going to help us identify our relationship to this energy, in a sense, to this Jupiter Pluto, about wanting to expand in a penetrating way or wanting to grow in a powerful way, especially in relationship to Capricornian themes. But it may involve some transformation. That's what, again, Pluto is all about. It may involve seeing maybe where this Plutonian expression in our own lives is just really exaggerated. Where are we like super attached to perhaps to growth, to expansion, to wanting to climb that corporate ladder, wanting to just get that. Jupiter represents greed, so it could be saying there's some kind of transformation that has to happen before we can truly sort of experience the more kind of elevated aspects of Jupiter, that we need to transform our perspective. And again, because Pluto is a mass consciousness energy, I mean, this is an energy that's affecting us all, and how are we relating, to the material aspect of our own lives, and collectively how we're relating to the material world at this time and moving forward through this retrograde process. This can be fanaticism. Jupiter is philosophies and religion, and Pluto again is that wanting, to manipulate, and if it's unconscious. So, and then again, these are like Capricorn, the tried and true foundations and structures of society. So, this is going to be a big process of, Jupiter and Pluto are going to meet 2 more times this year too, by the way. So this theme of kind of what is fanaticism, and I'm now bringing in the Mercury perspective, and really what this is speaking to me about is just how there's so much perspective right now on everything that's going on, and the importance of really being able to recognize like what information is really like true and resonating with you, because a lot of it may have a more nefarious sort of angle to it, wanting just to have your attention, wanting to have, so for whatever reason, maybe they want to sell you something, or just make you believe something, again, so that they can, keep you coming back. You know what I mean? Like this is that dynamic of seeing just in general through this Pluto and Capricorn retrograde process, just how much that control of money and finances and corporations and capitalism and everything is just so prevalent right now. But at the same time, with Jupiter there, it's like there's something that needs to ultimately sort of transform around our perspective of it all. And again, since these two will be meeting 2 more times this year, there's more to be revealed about that. And finally, the Sun Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And that is a part of this Pluto retrograde chart as well. The Sun is our light, our divinity, how we shine our energy out into the world, our individuality. Uranus is about liberation and freedom and seeing things differently. It's about humanitarianism. And in the sign of Taurus, this is saying that Taurus being also an earth sign, but this is about security and possessions, and it's about our values. And so what this combination is suggesting is that there's something very liberating at this time in regards to our values that is going to be involved in this Pluto retrograde process. That is, really saying we are moving towards or want to shine our light out in a liberated way in relationship to money, values, possessions, so it's kind of saying, okay, there's this Plutonian stuff that needs to be looked at, but ultimately the sun Uranus is there to kind of help us, help us move through that and liberate so that we are coming out, totally new and different. I mean, that's what Uranus is all about. A few key words for Uranus: unique, innovative, and including of others. This is cool. This is like, okay, we're going to have a humanitarian perspective ultimately as we move forward, but we're going to have to get through, this Pluto retrograde cycle in Capricorn of like looking at our attachment to materialism, looking at our attachment to authority figures, looking at our attachment to, the structures that define our society and what needs to transform, ultimately in a positive way, Jupiter, that creates, new foundations for all of that. And, I don't want to say Capricorn is negative. I think that I don't want to leave that impression because all energies have a sort of a polarity. But we're certainly seeing, just the greed and the excess, obviously, in the world. And so when we go through the Plutonian transformation, there's an opportunity then for a kind of a reconnection to the more pure expression of the Capricorn nature. I really appreciate you watching this video. If you like my channel, please subscribe. And I hope that you all have a very productive Pluto retrograde cycle. Take care.